Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Let me start with some macro thoughts. Deutsche Bank has cut global growth forecasts as COVID-19 is quickly becoming a global pandemic. I'll set aside the issue of the linguistics, we've discussed that before. Sees Germany sinking into a recession. And I think that, I called it a China EM feedback loop phenomenon. I should have added Germany, because Germany has tremendous exposure to the Chinese manufacturing machine. And essentially, I think everyone has been thinking that there's some kind of V-shaped recovery coming, and the evidence is not there. I think it's going to look like an L shape. And therefore, I think Germany is going to sink a lot deeper than even Deutsche Bank's prediction. Expects US growth to drop to below zero in Q2. That's entirely likely. David Inglis: never has a central banker ever said, I think we've done enough. We're leaving this to the mercy of the gods. Buckle up, and we'll see you on the other side. And essentially, because of the multiplicative, non-linear, viral nature of this COVID-19, I think that would actually be the best idea by far, because I think if they're going to cut rates dramatically, you're going to see a dead cat bounce and then an almighty sell-off as the markets panic even further, and then they've got no bullets left in the chamber. And I agree with what the Richmond Federal Reserve Bank President Tom Barkin said. To my mind, central banks can't come up with vaccines. As usual, Jay Powell and the Federal Reserve are slow to act. Germany and others are pumping money into their economies. Other central banks are much more aggressive. The US should have, for all of the right reasons, the lowest rate. We don't. Putting us at a competitive disadvantage. We should be leading, not following. That's Trump, and subsequent to that, he's tweeted again, demanding a dramatic rate cut. And as I've said, I think what is becoming increasingly clear is that the White House, the world's economists and policymakers are linear in their thinking and are flummoxed by the exponential multiplicative nature of this coronavirus. A rate cut, or even four, in my view, will produce a dead cat bounce and then a dynamic move to the downside. Policymakers cannot vaccine the market with rate cuts. This is a non-linear, exponential, exogenous thing, and a linear response will compound the debacle. In the US, according to Marketeer, the markets are looking for 100 basis points of rate cuts. This is from FX Pip Titan, Dow Jones daily chart. If price can't get back above the 200-day moving average or that aqua trend line, then expect to see a retest of the low hit on Feb 28th. And if I was a betting man, I think we'll probably hit that 200-day moving average on the announcement of a rate cut, which now appears imminent, and then will fall straight down. Yogi Chan last night, the Fed is not going to cut by that much in a single meeting. Let's go to some home thoughts. The main thing is to be moved, to love, to hope, to tremble, to live. Auguste Rodin's The Kiss, which is at the Tate, which I've seen personally, and it's quite extraordinary. The Louvre, staying with art galleries, closed. That was at the insistence of the employees over infection fears, and we're going to see more and more of that. Now, I wrote a piece about the origins of the coronavirus. Have a look at it if you haven't yet. It's very peculiar in that it's clearly bioengineered, because it's packing such a big punch, and that punch that's being packed is HIV related, which can only mean it was inserted into the DNA sequence. And it took me to some great writers like Thomas Pynchon in Gravity's Rainbow. If they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about the answers. In that same book, which is very dense and is amazing, really is, if you haven't read it, I dream that I have found us both again, with spring so many strangers' lives away, and we so free out walking by the sea, with someone else's paper words to say. They took us at the gates of green return, too lost by then to stop and ask them why. Do children meet again? Does any trace remain along the superhighways of July? Then I turned to an equally erudite and extraordinary and visionary writers, Thomas Pynchon, Don DeLillo, and a book called Libra, which is about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. There's always more to it. This is what history consists of. It is the sum total of the things they aren't telling us. And then I got a quote from him from Cosmopolis: everything is barely weeks, everything is days. We have minutes to live, and it does feel like a time of semiotic arousal when absolutely everything from the locusts to the crows to the virus is a sign or a harbinger of some major disjunctive event that's going to land on us. And from there, William Burroughs, a paranoid as someone who knows a little of what's going on. Nassim Taleb talking about blocking and freedom of expression, and I agree with him entirely. A Twitter feed is not an open public forum. It is private. It is like your daily newspaper or your personal classroom. You are free to let in only qualified students. Otherwise, noise will overtake your life. Political reflections, and I know it's been obsessive, and everyone keeps saying, Ali Khan, it's just the flu. It isn't. Let's forget about that. But I fancy writing a book about this, and I think I will. So let's get back to COVID-19. Daily new confirmed cases in South Korea, plus 599. What we know about South Korea is that they have probably the most comprehensive testing, and therefore their numbers are very, very indicative, I think, of are very clear. They're not deniable. They're not Groucho Marx territory. Iran, 523, and I'm seeing some horrific video footage coming out of Iran, really appalling. And there I would say they're clearly in denial. And in that Groucho Marx territory, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? Italy, spiking higher, plus 356, China, plus 125. And I think in China's case, they've put tremendous constraints on their people, something that's probably not possible elsewhere. Basically lock people into their houses. And in a sense, that is the correct approach, and that's what Taleb is saying. But again, they, I think, too, have not given us the proper numbers. France, plus 61, that's from Jody Graphics 15, a great resource, and presents the data very well. Bill Gates, coronavirus has started behaving a lot like the once-in-a-century pathogen we've been worried about. I wrote about the viral moment arriving on the 24th. I came across this from Thomas Shatwell, Mike Pence and his coronavirus emergency team praying for a solution. Prayer is good, but so is preparation. So just to recap, we had 4 more people die today from coronavirus, 2 who hadn't even been diagnosed. We now know that coronavirus has been in the US since at least January 15. but without testing it, spread everywhere. That's the epsilon theory. Press release just released by the White House with tweets praising Trump's management of coronavirus outbreak. Top tweets that was released by the Vice President's office. And that took me back to criticism about Xi Jinping, which is perfectly applicable to what Pence is doing. What is thriving, however, is all that ridiculous red culture and the nauseating adulation that the system heaps on itself via shameless pro-party hacks who chirrup hosannas at every turn. And as I wrote, for Trump it is a mirror image of the risk and trap Xi fell into head first. You dilly-dally and you get skewered because it remains non-linear and exponential. Have a listen to Trump's spiritual advisor, Paula White, expelling the coronavirus. I don't know what to make of this lady. As I said, viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics, and that a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine in point of fact. For those still unable to understand that death from multiplicative processes such as corona are not to be compared to those from thin-tailed sources, have a look at these links from Nassim Taleb again. This is a comment from Tom Frieden. Current international inbound flights from countries with confirmed cases. That is Prevent Epidemics, very good resource as well. Schiphol Airport is almost deserted. This is from Nerdy Pink. And this further confirms how those hopes of a V-shaped recovery are going to be dashed, as Rubini has said a number of times, and I have said myself. The impact of the coronavirus on China's exports was so big it broke our trade tracker model. The PMI subgauge of exports for February is literally off the charts. Tracy Alloway, no V-shaped recovery there. Then we learned from Cakesin, which is another interesting resource and doesn't chirrup hosannas. China's decision to leave asymptomatic patients off coronavirus infection tally sparks debate. China's decision to exclude individuals who carry the new coronavirus but show no symptoms from the country's public tally of infections has drawn debate over whether this approach obscures the scope of the epidemic, with a document received by Cakesin showing a significant proportion of one province's cases show no symptoms. And I think we've got a number of these sorts of data discrepancies in the reporting number, all which report the number lower than it should be. And that's why I was quoting Groucho Marx, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? A doctor in Wuhan told me she estimated asymptomatics were as many as 20% of cases. Data we obtained contrasts with the February Chinese Journal of Epidemiology study that said asymptomatics were less than 2% of patients. In Japan, asymptomatics were 10.2% of total infections last Wednesday, excluding Diamond Princess. A doctor in Wuhan told me she estimated asymptomatics were as many as 20% of cases. I wrote about the origin of the coronavirus over the weekend because it's so self-evident and obvious, and attempts to debunk it are pretty damn pathetic, even by people who I follow and respect. They decided to create a pseudo-virus where they essentially put a SARS-like CoV in an HIV envelope. That's the point. That's Scott BurkΞ 777. It worked. Using an HIV envelope, they replaced the RBD receptor binding domain of CL-CoV with that of SARS-CoV and used it to successfully infect bats through ACE2 mediation. Scott Burke again. The viral moment has arrived, as I've said. Interesting article in Asia Times. There is no easy narrative to maintain the illusion of an all-powerful Z when the country is still in parts in lockdown. It appears this virus is more viral than any meme Z and the CCP can propagate to stop it. Wuhan. And that applies actually to Trump and Pence as well, I think you'll find. The talk was of decoupling from the Chinese economy before the outbreak of COVID-19. That talk will intensify in the coming months, even years. This is an event that could, not necessarily will, change the global economic landscape. China has a lot to lose should that be the case. And that confirms what I said, a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine in point of fact. This is interesting from Paul Mazur and others at the New York Times. In coronavirus fight, China gives citizens a color code with red flags. A new system uses software to dictate quarantines and appears to send personal data to police in a troubling precedent for automated social control. As China encourages people to return to work despite the coronavirus outbreak, it has begun a bold mass experiment in using data to regulate citizens' lives by requiring them to use software on their smartphones that dictates whether they should be quarantined or allowed into subways, malls, and other public places. The Alipay Health Code, as China's new official news media has called the system, was first introduced in the eastern city of Hangzhou. People in China sign up through Ant's popular wallet app Alipay and are assigned a color code, green, yellow, or red, that indicates their health status. The Times analysis found that as soon as a user grants the software access to personal data, a piece of the program labeled Report Info and Location to Police sends the person's location, city name, and an identifying code number to a server. The coronavirus is proving to be one of those landmarks in the history of the spread of mass surveillance in China. A green code enables its holder to move about unrestricted. Someone with a yellow code may be asked to stay home for 7 days. Red means a 2-week quarantine. In Hangzhou, it has become nearly impossible to get around without showing your Alipay code. Propaganda-style banners remind everyone of the rules. Green code, travel freely. Red or yellow, report immediately. Beyond that, however, the Times' analysis also found that each time a person's code is scanned at a health checkpoint, for instance, his or her current location appears to be sent to the system servers. This could allow the authorities to track people's movements over time. Alipay has 900 million users across China and is partly owned by Alibaba, whose shares trade in New York and are owned by major international investors. This is an image of the propaganda-style banners which remind everyone of the rules. Green code, travel freely. Red or yellow, report immediately. I take you back to that article in China File. They now turn to rule over the people by means of what could be dubbed big data totalitarianism and WeChat terror. When I wrote in October last year about China turning 70, I was saying that Xi Jinping and the party were seeking to project national power and confidence on a grand scale. He said they have stood up And I said then, Xi's model is one of technocratic authoritarianism. A recent addition to his bookshelf included The Master Algorithm by Pedro Domingos. He's building an algorithmic society, has taken the propagation of ideology and cult of personality to extremes not seen since the days of Chairman Mao. And at that point, a little bit presciently, I concluded by saying the world in the 21st century exhibits viral, wildfire, and exponential characteristics and feedback loops, which only become obvious in hindsight. Previously, I've written about his algorithmic control. China file, you will all be no better than fields of garlic chives, giving yourselves up to being harvested by the blade of power time and time again. The Pentagon has also warned China, you don't want to play laser tag with us. The Chinese put a laser on a US P-8 Poseidon plane. Last year, the US conducted a record number of freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea, 9, up from 5 in 2018 and 6 in 2017. In January, the USS Montgomery, a literal combat ship, conducted the first US FONOP of 2020, sailing within a few nautical miles of the China-claimed Fiery Cross Reef. This is an aerial photo of that Fiery Cross Reef, but clearly we've got to keep an eye on that as well. Let's move on to the international markets, where we've had some serious volatility, and the markets are now expecting a rate cut after the Australians cut a quarter point. The euro is at 112.26, dollar index 97.422, Japanese yen 107.93, Swiss franc 0.9581, the pound 127.88, the Australian dollar post-rate cut 0.6544, India rupee has softened 72.95, South Korean won 11.9501, Brazilian real 447, Egyptian pound a little bit softer 15.67, and the rand at this key juncture around 15.50. This is the dollar index via FX Pip Titan. I know the market has high expectations of rate cuts, but I think this dollar retracement is now close to completion. Euro dollar has had a very strong run higher. We're currently at 111.26, but FX Pip Titan says the point of control is down. Commodity markets, gold, I must say, has flummoxed me. I expected it to be a lot higher by now, but I think that will come. And I will just remind you all that in today's terms, the previous all-time high is $2,700, and that when we get the move higher, it will be dynamic, exponential, and like a virus. We're currently at $15.95 and change. Crude oil has had a rebound, $47.50. I think that's a dead cat, or as Mia says, a dead bat bounce. Sub-Saharan Africa, we spoke to the doctors at the Institut Pasteur who confirmed the first case of coronavirus in Senegal. That's Nicolas Hack. A French national is being treated. There are 3 other suspected cases, and all those that were there with him on the Air Senegal Paris to Dakar are being quarantined. We've got very few cases in Africa so far. It's created a tremendous debate with a lot of people feeling that somehow we have some kind of genetic immunity. And what's interesting is that I don't think we've had any instances of Chinese nationals being diagnosed. They've all been European so far. I wrote about COVID-19, Sub-Saharan Africa, and a predicted and predictable recession. I said there are 2 issues with respect to the coronavirus. The first issue is whether the virus will infect the continent. We know that the virus is exponential, non-linear, and multiplicative. We know exponential disease propagation looks like, this was given to us by epsilon theory, nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom. Bill Gates, this disease, when it comes to Africa, will be more dramatic than in China, and I don't want to play down what is happening in China, he said. Listen to Kalonzo Musyoka's video. He said, I think our genes are strong because we have not heard of any coronavirus case on an African. We thank God. The answer to that question will be discovered imminently. So I'm not going to opine on it. Outside the question of infection, there is the coronavirus economic blowback. At the beginning of the year, these were the forecasts from the AFDB, IMF, and the World Bank. AFDB, Africa's economic outlook continues to brighten. Its real GDP growth, estimated at 3.4% for 2019, is projected to accelerate to 3.9% in 2020 and 4.1% in 2021. IMF growth is expected to strengthen to 3.5% in 2020-2021. World Bank regional growth is expected to pick up to 2.9% in 2020. The World Bank provided risks a sharper than expected deceleration in major trading partners such as China, the Euro area, or the United States would substantially lower export revenues and investment. A faster than expected slowdown in China, which is happening, would cause a sharp fall in commodity prices, has happened. And given sub-Saharan Africa's heavy reliance on extractive sectors for export and fiscal revenues, weigh heavily on regional activity. Now, China will post negative GDP in Q1 2020, and I think negative GDP in Q2. That's a fact. Commodity prices have been crushed. The 11 African states most at risk from the physical spread of coronavirus, according to Pat Thaker: Algeria, Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Morocco, Sudan, Angola, Tanzania, Ghana, and Kenya. No Congo in there. We can already see weaker China demand. China's taking a third less West African oil as virus hits demand. The rand is the purest proxy for the phenomenon of weakening China demand. African countries heavily dependent on China being the main taker are also at the bleeding edge of this feedback phenomenon. A 1 percentage point decrease in China's domestic investment growth is associated with an average 0.6 percentage point decrease in Africa's exports. We're going to fall to the rate of growth we saw in 2009. Moodys, of course, previously downgraded Nigeria to negative, and we learnt that foreign investors are propping up the Naira to the tune of $16 billion via short-term certificates. I said in November, everyone knows how this story ends. When the music stops, everyone will dash for the exit and the currency will collapse. That moment surely is much closer. Balance sheets are maxed out. Debt burdens have increased and affordability has weakened across sub-Saharan Africa, while a shift in debt structures has left some countries more exposed to a financial shock, said Moodys. On top of that, we have a locust invasion. If I shut up heaven that there be no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people. Chronicles. Read man_integrated for an in-depth analysis of the locust threat. So, buckle up, this is a perfect storm. African Development Bank foreign lenders are making a killing from Africa. African borrowers should not be price takers, he said. You're going to have to pay back when you're not earning the money. These bonds are oversubscribed because people see opportunities to make a killing. This year, Angola, Gabon, and Ghana have tapped the Eurobond market. Ghana got around $15 billion of orders for a $3 billion deal last month. Investors have been richly rewarded for buying African sovereign dollar debt. It generated a total return of 21% in 2019, more than any other region in emerging markets. Investors better start picking their spots better. Rising debt service ratios are increasingly problematic. Razia Khan. Still, Adesina said Africa isn't facing a debt crisis. Debt is not a problem. It's very bad debt that's a problem, he said. You've got to worry about the terms of those Eurobonds, the short-term nature and the repayment risk when they are due. His Excellency President Felix Tshisekedi attended the APAC 2020 conference in Washington, and the DR Congo will appoint an ambassador to Israel and open an office in Jerusalem. He's talking of strong support of Trump's peace plan. The Americans have been supporting Felix Tshisekedi a considerable amount, actually. The issue is, can he break from the puppet master, Kabila? Simply amazing and beautiful. This is a short video, Takele Uma. Air travel connectivity from Africa to the world. This is via Charlie Robertson. And Charlie's saying this tells us why we have not seen so much infection on the continent. As I said, we're going to find out imminently about infections. South African All Share down 9.19% year to date. Dollar versus Rand, I think the Rand is flirting with disaster. Egyptian Pound 15.65, EGX30 down 11.97% year to date. Nigerian All Share down 3.82% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange down 3.09% year to date. Kenya's imports from China have plunged by 58.64 billion shillings in the first 2 months of the year. That was obvious. Top in business, Tuskies and Naivas to raise prices over coronavirus. And this shows us, how we're all, whether we're in Nairobi or Washington, connected to that global supply chain which begins in China. Fighting on the Kenya-Somalia border between Somalia Army and Jubaland mercenaries, that's from Ahmed Nasir. And that northern frontier part has become very volatile. Had an opportunity to review the COVID-19 screening processes at Jomo Kenyatta Airport, Nairobi. Procedures are being followed, screening all arrivals through interviews and thermal cameras and handheld scanners. WHO Kenya. We know that the coronavirus is exponential, non-linear and multiplicative, and we know what exponential disease propagation looks like in the real world. Nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom. Stanbic reports full-year earnings per share was up 1.637%. Loans and advances to customers up 9.264%. Total assets up 4.493%. Net interest income up 10%. Non-interest revenue up 14%. Profit for the year up 1.648%. EPS up 1.637%, and they hiked the dividend 21.552%. They had to pay out about 1.5 billion shillings on a guarantee, and that crimped these earnings. Otherwise, it looks very, very solid, and essentially they look very good earnings, trading on a P of less than 7. Nairobi All Shares down 9.75%, and the NSE20 is down 10.78%. Thank you for listening.